Have you ever looked at your family tree and noticed something that just goes way beyond a normal coincidence?
Oh, like mapping out the generations and seeing those weird patterns.
Yeah, exactly. You start looking at old photographs or, just thinking about the stories your parents told you about your grandparents, and
Mhm.
you see these undeniable recurring patterns. And I'm not talking about inheriting a distinct jawline or like a knack for music.
Right, you mean the heavier stuff.
Exactly. I'm talking about a specific, really stubborn struggle, a dark cloud almost. Maybe it's a deep-seated, explosive anger that every single firstborn son seems to possess.
Or a cyclical pattern of financial ruin, where every generation builds something up only to just systematically destroy it by their 40s.
Yes. Or perhaps it's this unexplainable, paralyzing fear that just seems to pass from one generation to the next, almost exactly like a genetic trait.
It really does feel encoded, doesn't it? When you look closely at those family dynamics, it's as if you didn't just inherit your grandfather's blue eyes. You also inherited his profound, unshakable melancholy. It behaves, well, literally like DNA.
It behaves exactly like DNA. You map it out on paper, and it looks like a biological inheritance.
Yeah.
But what if the root of that pattern isn't biological at all?
Right. What if it's deeper?
What if it isn't in your DNA but is actually embedded in your spiritual lineage?
Right.
That is the exact question driving our deep dive today. We are venturing into an exploration of the unseen.
And it is a massive exploration.
Oh, it really is. We're unpacking this incredibly complex, highly structured theological framework provided by Father Chad Ripperger. He's a Catholic exorcist and theologian, and the source material we're working from today spans 4 incredibly detailed, hours-long lectures.
Which is a lot of material to get through.
It is. And our mission here is to understand the actual granular mechanics of what he calls generational spirits and demonic activity. We aren't just going to look at spooky stories.
Right. We're looking at the actual engineering of this worldview.
Exactly. How these entities supposedly operate, how they attach themselves to families or specific geographic places, and the rigorous, almost terrifyingly legalistic rules that they absolutely must follow.
And before we get deep into the architecture of this unseen world, we really need to establish a very clear baseline for you, the listener.
Yes, please do, because this gets intense.
It does. The source material we're diving into today contains highly specific religious, social, and sometimes politically charged viewpoints.
Very charged.
Right. Throughout these lectures, the speaker touches on modern societal roles, specific political parties, and massive cultural movements, and he interprets all of them through the lens of spiritual warfare. So our goal here is not to take a side.
No, not at all.
We aren't here to endorse these viewpoints, nor are we here to condemn them. Our job is simply to impartially report on the factual content of these lectures to convey the original speaker's exact theological framework.
We're just laying out the blueprints, basically.
Exactly. We just want to give you the blueprint of this specific, highly structured universe so you can understand how it supposedly operates.
And I'm really glad we set that boundary, because to understand this framework, you have to completely drop whatever preconceived notions you have from Hollywood horror movies.
Oh, yeah, throw the movies out the window.
Right. Because in this universe, demons are not mindless, chaotic monsters running around a haunted house, throwing plates at the wall just for the fun of it.
No, they are highly intelligent legalists.
Yes, legalists. They are bound by incredibly strict metaphysical laws. And to understand the rules of their game, the lectures take us all the way back to the fall of Adam and Eve.
Which is the foundation of the whole legal system here.
Exactly. Now, in this theological structure, when Adam and Eve fell, they didn't just break a rule and get a slap on the wrist. They actually forfeited a legal jurisdiction. They ceded a level of physical dominion over the earth and over themselves to demons.
That concept of legal jurisdiction is the absolute bedrock of everything we're going to talk about today. You really have to understand what a demon actually is in this theology.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So, they are pure spirits. That means they possess an intellect, which is the ability to know things, and a will, the ability to choose things. What they do not have, and, well, never have had, is a physical body.
Right, no flesh and blood.
Exactly. They don't have brains, they don't have nervous systems, they don't have adrenaline. But as a direct result of the fall of humanity, these pure spirits gained a very specific, terrifying loophole.
A loophole.
Yeah, they gained the ability to act on human bodily organs.
Wait, I need to pause you right there because that feels like a massive leap.
Hmm.
If they don't have physical bodies, how are they interacting with ours?
It's a great question, and the lectures explain it through the division of human faculties. So you have your higher faculties, your own intellect and will, which are purely spiritual.
Okay, tracking with you.
And then you have your lower faculties, which are strictly tied to your physical body. These are your imagination, your memory, and your emotions or passions.
Because those all require physical hardware, right?
Exactly. Because the imagination physically requires a brain to produce images, and because emotions require a physical nervous system to actually produce feelings, demons, having gained that physical dominion at the fall, can directly manipulate those specific areas.
Okay, so they can mess with the physical machinery.
Yeah.
But what about my actual thoughts? If I'm just sitting here quietly, can they read my mind and know exactly what I'm planning?
No. And this is a massive, crucial boundary in this theology. They absolutely cannot read minds.
Oh, wow. Really?
They are permanently locked out of the control room. They cannot directly control your human intellect, and they cannot override your free will. Your core ability to reason and to choose remains entirely yours.
So they can't just flip a switch in my soul.
Right. Only God has access to the inner sanctum of the intellect and will.
I hear that, but I mean, it creates a huge paradox for me. If they are locked out of my mind, how on earth do they seem to know exactly what I'm thinking or exactly what my specific secret weaknesses are?
Well, the way the lectures explain the mechanism behind this, it honestly gave me chills.
Same. It's not magic at all. It's basically behavioral psychology on a terrifyingly granular level. The lectures explain that pure spirits possess what is called infused knowledge.
Yes, let's break down infused knowledge because it's so completely foreign to how humans learn.
Right, we have to study and practice.
Exactly. Humans learn discursively. We read a book, we practice a skill, we make mistakes, we slowly gather data over a long period of time. Angels and demons don't do that.
They just know it.
Yeah. When they were created, God infused the complete instantaneous knowledge of the nature of the universe right into their intellects. They don't have to study human anatomy. They possess the absolute perfect blueprint of the human machine.
That's terrifying. So they know the blueprint of the machine way better than any neuroscientist ever could, and because of that, they don't need to read your mind, they just read your bodily reactions.
Which they can see with perfect clarity.
Right. The lectures describe them watching your physiological responses with impossible precision. They literally watch the temperature of your eyes warm up a fraction of a degree when you lie.
Or they observe microscopic changes in your brain waves or your heart rate.
Exactly. They introduce a stimulus, maybe they manipulate your memory to bring up a past grievance, and then they just sit back and watch how your body reacts to it.
Yeah.
And from that tiny physical reaction, they deduce exactly what you're thinking.
It makes them the ultimate poker players, honestly. They are constantly looking for your physical tells. They introduce an image into your imagination, which, again, they have the legal right to do because the imagination is tied to the physical brain.
Right, that's their jurisdiction.
Yeah. And then they watch. Does your breathing get shallow? Does your pulse quicken? If your physical body responds favorably to that image, they know they've found a pressure point.
So they simulate consent by mapping your physical reactions to their stimuli.
Precisely.
Okay, I want to try an analogy here to make sure you, the listener, and I are visualizing this correctly. Let's imagine the human soul, the intellect and the will, is a computer's core operating system.
Okay, I like this.
So the demon is a hacker, but they can't actually hack the core OS. They can't rewrite who you fundamentally are or force you to delete your own files.
Because that's the intellect and will.
Exactly. But because of the fall, they have root access to your hardware peripherals. So they can flood your monitor with a million incredibly targeted, annoying pop-up ads.
Which represents them manipulating your imagination and memory.
Right. And they can overclock your processor until the fan is screaming and the machine is literally overheating, which represents them manipulating your emotions and your nervous system.
Overloading the hardware.
Yeah. And they do all of this physical disruption, hoping that the user, which is you, gets so overwhelmed, so distracted, and so stressed out by the flashing lights and the heat that you voluntarily click the wrong button and compromise the system yourself.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize the exact mechanics being described here. The hardware is under attack, but the user still has to click the mouse.
You still have to make the choice.
Always. And if we carry that analogy forward, it explains one of the most counterintuitive pieces of spiritual advice in this entire framework.
It is.
The absolute necessity of ignoring your emotions. The lectures stress repeatedly that you must not follow your emotions blindly in the spiritual life.
Which goes against almost all modern self-help advice, right? I mean, we are constantly told to trust our feelings and listen to our gut. Why is that so dangerous in this specific worldview?
Because the emotions are the exact faculty that demons have the jurisdiction to manipulate.
Oh, wow.
If you're navigating your spiritual health based on whether you feel good or consoled or at peace or conversely, if you're panicking because you suddenly feel depressed, angry, or desolate, you are playing entirely on their turf.
You're letting the hacker dictate your actions based on how hot they can make the processor run.
Exactly. The text even pushes this into the realm of extraordinary religious experiences. The framework talks about simulated phenomena.
Oh, the simulated stuff is wild.
It really is. Because demons can manipulate the physical brain, they can simulate incredibly complex physiological states, they can induce false ecstasies, simulate out-of-body experiences, manifest physical stigmata, and even make people feel physically like they are in an entirely different location.
The historical example the lectures gave for that just completely blew my mind. The whole concept of witches flying on broomsticks.
Right, which we usually just write off.
We totally do.
Yeah.
We tend to think of that as just a fairy tale or folklore. But the lectures claim that historically there were instances where demons would literally physically move the broom with the person on it, simulating flight.
Or even more insidiously, they'd just mess with the brain.
Yes. They would manipulate the person's brain to completely fabricate the experience. The person would truly believe they had traveled across the country, interacted with other people, participated in rituals, and they would even wake up with physical marks or bruises on their body.
All while their physical body never actually left their bedroom.
It is a total hijacking of the physical senses to deceive the intellect.
And it forces you to realize that in this theology, your baseline defense simply cannot be your senses or your feelings.
Yeah.
Your fortress is the calm, rational will. It's the part of you that makes a choice, regardless of how much the hardware is screaming.
Right. So we've established that they're constantly spamming your mental monitor with pop-up ads and overheating your emotional processor. That's just baseline temptation.
The everyday stuff.
Yeah. But what happens when the user just absolutely refuses to click the bad link? Do these legalistic entities just give up and go home?
Not a chance.
No, the lectures make it clear they don't. They escalate. If they can't trick you internally, they start throwing things at the physical hardware. And this is where the framework moves from ordinary temptation into the 6 specific escalating forms of extraordinary demonic activity.
And this progression is incredibly rigid. It's not random at all. It's a hierarchy of attack based on what legal rights they have managed to acquire.
So step 1.
The first and most basic extraordinary form is physical pain.
This sounds terrifying, but in the grand scheme of this theology, it's almost treated as like a badge of honor for holy people.
It really is.
We're talking about inexplicable external physical assaults, being pushed down the stairs by an unseen force, waking up with unexplained scratches, or even physical beatings.
And the primary example the text uses here is St. Padre Pio, right?
Yes, the famous 20th century mystic. He famously reported being physically beaten in his cell at night. But it is a purely external attack because the demon has zero internal access. They're basically just throwing rocks at the outside house because the doors are securely locked.
Yeah. Precisely. It is frightening, but spiritually speaking, it is the least dangerous form because the will is entirely uncompromised.
Okay, but what if they do get in?
Well, if we escalate to the second form, we hit the one everyone knows from Hollywood, possession. However, the theological reality of possession presented in these lectures is far more structured and terrifying than a movie.
How does he define it?
Possession is defined as the demon taking absolute tyrannical control over the physical body, entirely suspending the person's mental and volitional faculties.
So the person isn't even there anymore, effectively.
Functionally, yes. The person completely blacks out. They have zero memory of what happens while the demon is manifesting. The entity is driving the car, and the owner is locked in the trunk, completely unconscious.
The symptoms described are exactly what you'd expect, but hearing them detailed in a clinical theological context is just jarring.
It's very clinical.
Superhuman strength, an absolute violent aversion to anything sacred, like holy water or relics and speaking unknown languages. The lectures specifically detail a case of a woman who began speaking fluent conversational Latin during an exorcism, despite never having studied a single day of it in her life.
But the example that really stood out, the one that stopped you in your tracks.
Oh my gosh, the 10-month-old baby.
Ah, yes. The case he refers to as the Chucky doll.
It is horrifying. We're talking about a 10-month-old little girl, a baby who doesn't even have full motor control or the ability to form words.
Right.
And yet, the exorcist describes how, when the demon manifested, this tiny infant would contort, snarl, and violently attempt to gouge the eyes out of anyone who came near her.
It is a profoundly disturbing image, but we really have to pause here because this exact scenario, a possessed infant, forces us to address a massive question about the justice of this entire framework.
I am so glad you brought this up, because I was practically yelling at my notes when I read that.
It's the obvious question.
It is. If the human will is the ultimate fortress, and possession involves the complete takeover of the physical body to the point of blacking out, how on earth is that fair? Especially for a 10-month-old baby.
Right. Where is the justice?
Exactly. How can an infant, who doesn't even have the capacity to choose right from wrong, be subjected to a literal demonic takeover? Where is the legal justification for that?
It's the pivotal question. The lectures explain that possession can, and often does, happen through a person's own grave voluntary sin, like someone actively inviting an entity in.
Sure, in that case, they signed the contract.
Right, the legal right was freely given. But, as in the case of the infant, it can also happen through absolutely no fault of the victim. It can occur because a curse was placed upon the family line. Or, most mysteriously, simply because God permitted it.
God permitted it. I mean, that sounds like a terrifyingly convenient loophole for divine cruelty. How does the theology justify a loving God permitting the baby to be hijacked?
It justifies it through a very challenging concept of the mercy of God and divine providence. In this view, demons are not autonomous warlords running around doing whatever they want.
They have a boss.
Exactly. They are dogs on a very short leash held by God. God strictly limits them. He will only ever permit an extraordinary attack-like possession if it is the absolute prerequisite to achieving a greater spiritual good that could not be achieved any other way.
Okay, give me an example of how that works practically, because how is a possessed baby a greater spiritual good?
Well, the lectures suggest that in cases of innocent possession, the demon is unwittingly acting as an instrument of divine purification or correction for the surrounding community, specifically the family.
Oh, so it's not even about the baby.
Right. Perhaps the parents of that child were entrenched in a multi-generational pattern of grave sin or involved in the occult, and they were completely spiritually blind to their trajectory.
They needed a wake-up call.
A massive one. The shocking, undeniable horror of their infant being possessed forces the family to their knees. It forces them to seek the church, to confront their own hidden sins, and to radically alter their lives.
So the child suffers temporarily in the physical realm, but it results in the eternal salvation of the entire family structure.
Exactly. In this legalistic view, the math checks out. Temporary physical hijacking is permitted to prevent eternal spiritual destruction.
Wow. Okay. It is a relentlessly rigid worldview, but you can see how perfectly the internal logic locks together. It is not arbitrary chaos. Every single movement has a permitted legal endpoint.
Always.
So that's possession. What if the demon doesn't have the legal right to possess the body, but still really wants to destroy the person? That brings us to the third form, which is oppression.
Oppression is a really fascinating pivot. If they can't get you internally and they can't take over your body, they attack your life circumstances.
The environment around you.
Yes. Oppression is a coordinated, inexplicable assault on a person's external reality. We're talking about sudden cascading health crises where doctors just can't find a cause.
Or inexplicable job losses.
Right. Sudden financial ruin where the math just doesn't make sense, or profound, unexplainable isolation. You could be the kindest person in the world, and suddenly every friend you have turns against you and abandons you for absolutely no rational reason.
The environment itself becomes totally hostile, which would naturally lead someone to profound despair. And if the external pressure doesn't break you, the fourth form moves the attack to the internal mind. This is obsession.
Back to the computer analogy.
Right. If ordinary temptation is a pot-up ad, obsession is a targeted DDoS attack on your brain. We are talking about persistent, relentlessly intrusive, rashly absurd thoughts that the person simply cannot shake.
It's a relentless mental loop.
A loop of despair or violent imagery or overwhelming self-hatred that leads to extreme prostration, sheer exhaustion, and often suicidal ideation. And the lectures make a deeply controversial claim here, directly intersecting with modern psychology.
Yes, the framework explicitly argues that many modern psychological diagnoses might actually be misdiagnosed cases of demonic obsession.
And he names a specific one.
He does. The primary example the source uses is bipolar disorder. The text claims that the dramatic, seemingly unexplainable swings between manic highs and profound depressive lows can, in certain specific cases, actually have demonic roots.
I want to be very careful how we present this, but it is a massive part of the source material. The claim isn't that psychology is entirely fake.
No, not at all.
Right, but rather that the medical field only looks at the hardware. The text asserts that when proper deliverance prayers and exorcism protocols are applied to certain individuals diagnosed with bipolar disorder, those dramatic mood swings sometimes completely and permanently cease.
It's a profound reframing of mental distress.
It really is. It suggests that some mental illness is actually a spiritual entity endlessly pressing the overheat button on the emotional processor.
It creates a tremendous burden of discernment, which we will get to later in the diagnosis section, but let's finish the hierarchy. The fifth form moves away from the human person entirely. This is infestation.
The classic haunted house.
Exactly. This is when demons acquire the legal right to attach themselves to places, to animals, or to inanimate objects.
But it's not just creepy noises like floors creaking.
No, it's very physical. The lectures gave the example of a family that bought a house previously owned by a practicing witch.
Oh, the dog story.
Yeah. Immediately upon moving in, the family's previously healthy dog became violently ill repeatedly whenever it was inside the house. The entity was legally bound to the property and was just lashing out at the biological life within it.
And there's the car story, too.
Right. Another wild example was a nearly brand new car, fresh off the lot, no mechanical flaws whatsoever, that simply refused to shift into gear for unexplainable reasons. An infestation of a machine.
A demon stopping a transmission. I mean, it really reinforces how physical this theology is. The spiritual directly heavily impacts the material.
It's all connected.
And then we reach the final sixth form, which is subjugation. This is the voluntary pact. This isn't a demon tricking you. This is a human being explicitly, voluntarily, and legally signing over their rights to an entity.
Blood pacts, formal dedications.
Yeah, it is the ultimate legal surrender.
So we have mapped the 6 forms of attack. We see how an individual is targeted, but here's where the lectures zoom out, and the framework becomes truly systemic.
It gets much bigger.
It does. These entities are not just roaming around looking for random, isolated individuals to bother. They are highly focused on bloodlines. They operate on a multi-generational scale. Which brings us to the very core of our deep dive, the mechanics of generational spirits.
Let's define this clearly for the listener. A generational spirit, sometimes referred to historically as a familiar spirit, is defined as a specific demon that is passed from one generation to another within the exact same family lineage.
The term familiar is very literal here.
Oh, incredibly literal. It becomes deeply familiar with the family. It studies the grandfather. It watches the father. It analyzes the son.
Gathering data for decades.
Exactly. It learns the family's specific genetic weaknesses, their emotional triggers, and their psychological blind spots, and it systematically exploits them to ensure the family remains trapped in a specific cycle of sin or suffering.
It's a terrifying concept, really, a parasite that rides the family tree. But the obvious question is, how do they get in the front door to begin with? What gives them the legal right to attach to a lineage?
The lectures outline 3 primary entry points. The first is a mortal sin committed by an ancestor. It has to be a grave matter murder, profound fraud, occult practices. The ancestor commits the act, and the demon claims a foothold in the family structure.
Okay, so that's the first door.
The second entry point is a curse. Now, this could be formal maleficium, actual intentional witchcraft performed by an enemy against the family to ruin their lineage, but it can also be terrifyingly intimate.
Right, the parent-child dynamic.
Yes. The text talks about the catastrophic spiritual damage of a parent cursing their own child, even while the child is still in utero. If a mother, in a moment of deep distress or anger, wishes non-existence or harm upon her unborn child, she's utilizing her natural authority to legally open a door for a spirit of rejection or destruction to attach to that infant.
The power of spoken words tied to authority is a massive theme here. And regarding curses, the lectures highlight a very specific organizational example: Freemasonry.
Right, this was highly specific. The claim in the lectures is that the oaths taken in Freemasonry act as literal binding generational curses.
He was very adamant about that.
Extremely. The speaker asserts that they regularly see cases where an ancestor's involvement in Freemasonry brings in spirits that manifest in subsequent generations in very specific physical and moral ways. He explicitly links Masonic curses to generational respiratory issues like asthma, or unexplainable breathing problems, or recurring severe sins against the Sixth Commandment.
Specifically, sexual perversions or molestation within the family line.
Yes, it is presented as a direct cause and effect spiritual inheritance.
And the third entry point, as we discussed with the possessed infant, is simply God's permission, usually to force a family to ultimately confront and root out a hidden weakness. But once the spirit is in the house, how does it spread from the grandfather to the father to the son?
It's a process of infection. The demon legally attaches to the ancestor who opened the door. It enters the home environment, and then it just starts picking at the other family members.
Agitating the system.
Yeah, it irritates the children, provokes the spouse, creating this awful atmosphere of tension or despair. It uses that overwhelming environment to try and get the other family members to commit their own grave sins. Once a child commits a grave sin in response to the environment, they have officially opened their own personal door, and the spirit has successfully replicated its jurisdiction into the next generation.
But there is a deeper structural mechanism of transmission that the text focuses on, and it is arguably the most controversial and fundamental concept in the entire framework. It is called the divine economy of authority.
We really need to slow down and unpack this because everything else rests on it. In our modern Western world, we tend to view authority as a social construct, right?
Yeah, like an org chart.
Exactly. A manager has authority over an employee because of a corporate org chart. But in this theology, authority is not a social construct. It is a physical and spiritual reality built into the natural law of the universe. It is as real as gravity.
Exactly. Authority is a metaphysical umbrella, and the lectures emphasize traditional patriarchal structures to explain this. In this view, a father holds the authority of headship over his wife and his children.
Okay, so he's holding the umbrella.
Right. So if the father, operating as the head, commits a grave sin or engages in the occult, he doesn't just damage his own soul. Because he holds the umbrella, when he opens a door to a demon, he brings that demon under his headship. This passively subjects the entire family, everyone standing under his umbrella, to that specific spiritual influence.
It's the ultimate terrifying consequence of leadership. And the text notes that while this generational baggage often passes biologically because it is fundamentally based on the natural law of submission and authority, it transcends biology.
The adoption example.
Yes, the most fascinating example given was adoptive families. An adopted child, biologically unrelated to the parents, has a natural, innate, God-given inclination to submit to the authority of their new parents.
Because of that structural submission.
Right? Because of that, the adopted child can legally inherit the generational spirit attached to those adoptive parents.
And conversely, the framework warns that an adopted child might bring a generational spirit from their biological lineage into the adoptive home. And if the adoptive parents aren't spiritually vigilant, that entity can begin operating within the new family structure. It highlights how incredibly porous and spiritually interconnected families are in this worldview.
Let me go back to my metaphors to solidify this, because it helps me picture it. Bringing a demon into your family through sin is like giving a highly destructive, chaotic, drug-addicted friend a spare key to your house.
That's a great visual.
Right. Now, because you are the head of the house, you made the choice. But your kids, they didn't give him the key. They don't even like him. But because they live under your roof, they now have to deal with the awful roommate you voluntarily allowed inside.
They have to deal with the fallout.
They have to live with the tension, the broken dishes in the kitchen, the constant anxiety. They are suffering the environmental consequences of your legal decision.
That is a perfect visualization of passive subjection. But I want to introduce some friction here, if that's okay.
Please do.
If we connect this to the broader fields of sociology and psychology, we really have to look at the massive overlap between this theology and secular behavioral science. In psychology, there is a well-documented concept called implicit learning.
How does that work?
Well, a child watches their father get stressed. The father reacts by flying into a violent rage. The child's developing brain implicitly learns that rage is the standard effective mechanism for dealing with stress. Fast forward 20 years, that child is an adult, gets stressed at work, and flies into a violent rage. Psychologists call that generational trauma or psychological inheritance. It's entirely internal.
Right. And what the lectures are claiming is something fundamentally different. The source text doesn't deny implicit learning. It acknowledges that bad psychology exists.
But it adds a layer.
A huge layer. It insists that on top of the psychology, there is an actual autonomous, highly intelligent spiritual entity acting from the outside. The demon is actively pressing on the family members, manipulating their emotional hardware to recreate the exact sin of the ancestor. It's an external, supernatural oppression actively driving and enforcing the internal psychological pattern.
And there is a limit to how long this can go on, thankfully. The lectures note that God's mercy usually restricts a familial spirit to 4 or 5 generations.
Oh, so it eventually burns out.
Right. After 4 or 5 generations of compounding trauma, the spirit essentially burns out, loses its legal influence, or ideally, a specific person in the lineage finally recognizes the pattern and does the rigorous spiritual warfare necessary to break the cycle permanently.
But wait, it doesn't stop at families. The scope of this deep dive just keeps getting wider and wider.
It scales up massively.
It does. The lectures expand this concept of generational spirits into what they call macro spirits. The claim is that these pure spirits don't just preside over family trees, they preside over entire cultural movements, entire nations, and specific geographic regions.
And again, keeping to our mandate of impartial reporting, the specific examples a lecturer provides to illustrate this are fascinating and highly charged.
Very charged.
He claims that entire generations can be legally subjected to a specific entity. For instance, he points to the hippie generation of the 1960s, claiming that collective movement is afflicted by a specific generational spirit of indocility and rebellion, basically, a rejection of all authority.
And he didn't spare the current generation either.
No. Moving to the present, he claims the current youth generation is afflicted by a spirit of insensibility and overstimulation. The entity's goal is to keep them so constantly bombarded with digital noise that they become numb to reality and entirely incapable of silence.
He even names specific cities. He claims that based on exorcism cases, Fresno, California, has a regional demon of illness presiding over it.
And Los Angeles.
Right, Los Angeles, which is quite fittingly perhaps, is presided over by a demon of unreality. It's an entity entirely dedicated to disconnecting the population from objective truth and immersing them in illusion.
But the national analysis is perhaps the most striking and requires the deepest unpacking. The source asserts unequivocally that the national generational spirit of the United States of America is avarice and fraud.
Yes, avarice, which is extreme greed and fraud. And, when I first heard that, I thought, okay, sure, American consumerism, corporate greed, that makes sense.
Because it seems like an easy target.
Yeah, but the ultimate proof the lecturer provides for this isn't just people buying too many TVs. It is entirely systemic. The source uses the entire structure of the modern American banking system to prove the existence of this macro spirit. Specifically, he targets fractional reserve banking.
We really need to explain the mechanics of his argument here because it shows how this theology views economics.
Well, for it.
In a fractional reserve system, a bank only has to hold a tiny percentage of actual cash, the reserve, compared to what they lend out. If you deposit $10, they keep $1 in the vault and legally create $9 out of thin air by just typing a 0 on a screen to loan to someone else.
And from a strictly economic standpoint, that is the engine of modern global growth. But from the theological standpoint of these lectures, it is an ontological nightmare.
Ontological nightmare is a good way to put it.
The argument is that money is supposed to represent a tangible physical measure of actual human labor or actual physical goods. By allowing banks to create value out of literal thin air, the entire system is based on an illusion. It is creating something from nothing, which only God can do.
Right, it's mimicking divine creation.
Exactly. Therefore, the lecturer points to fractional reserve banking as the ultimate, undeniable proof of systemic, nationwide fraud driven purely by avarice. He claims it proves the U.S. economy is inherently deceptive at its metaphysical root, completely legally subjecting the nation to that specific demon.
It is a stunning synthesis of theology and macroeconomics, and he extends this macro analysis to political and cultural movements as well. The source claims that the modern Democratic Party operates under a presiding spirit of hypocrisy and fraud.
But he also calls out his own camp.
Importantly, yes, he doesn't spare his own side. He notes that the traditional Catholic movement, the very hyper-traditional movement that the speaker himself is a part of, is plagued by a demon of criticism and subtle pride. This entity leads its adherents to constantly criticize the hierarchy, look down on other believers, and assume a position of intellectual superiority.
The macro spirits map perfectly onto the specific systemic flaws of the collective groups.
They do.
Okay, so if we take all of this as reality, if a family or a city or an entire political movement is plagued by one of these highly intelligent, legalistic spirits, How can you possibly tell?
Or do you know for sure?
Right. How do you know if your family's multi-generational history of depression and bankruptcy is just a string of bad luck, bad genetics, poor financial education, or a literal generational demon actively destroying your lineage? This brings us to section 4 of our deep dive: diagnosis and the incredibly vital principle of diabolic inversion.
Diagnosis is a two-step process in this framework. It always begins on the natural level. You have to be a detective in your own family tree.
Looking for clues.
Exactly. You are literally tracing the lineage, looking for statistical spikes. You are looking for recurring patterns of deep depression, unexplainable, explosive anger, recurring financial ruin, or specific types of addiction that seem to hit every generation at the exact same age.
But you have to be incredibly careful, because these entities are not going to leave a calling card. They are masters of obfuscation. They hide their true nature.
They don't want you fighting the wrong battle.
Always. And the text explains this by distinguishing between what it calls root vices and daughter vices. What you see on the surface, the obvious, glaring sin ruining a family, is almost never the actual problem. It is a smokescreen.
Let's use an example to illustrate this because it's crucial. Let's say a family seems entirely plagued by lust or severe issues with chastity, affairs, addictions, broken marriages in every single generation.
Okay, pretty obvious problem.
Right. That is the daughter vice. It is loud and obvious. But if you dig deeper, the root vice, the actual demon hiding underneath the floorboards, is often fear. Yeah. The family is plagued by a profound existential terror of abandonment. They're using the daughter vice of lust to self-medicate, to desperately seek connection and control, to soothe the root fear.
Another great example from the lectures. A family might seem plagued by constant petty quarreling. Every family gathering ends in a screaming match. You think, oh, they have a demon of anger.
But that's the smokescreen.
Right. The root vice is actually an unwillingness to suffer. They are terrified of the emotional vulnerability required to suffer patiently with one another. So the moment any emotional tension arises, they immediately start fights to deflect the pain. They use anger as a shield against vulnerability.
Identifying the exact hidden root is critical, and it leads us to what I consider the most conceptually beautiful and hopeful idea in the entire lecture series: the principle of diabolic inversion.
I am so glad we are here, because this concept completely blew my mind. It reframes everything. The theology posits that demons, as fallen creatures, lack all originality.
They can't create.
Right. They cannot create anything new. They can only mock, distort, and invert God's original design. They're the ultimate antimatter. Therefore, if you can accurately identify the specific root demon plaguing a family line, you haven't just found your enemy. You have simultaneously, mathematically identified that family's divine calling. You just have to look at the exact opposite virtue.
It is a profound theological equation. The demon attacks the area of greatest potential. The example given in the text is beautiful. Imagine a family plagued for generations by a demon of deep, destructive pride.
Okay, so arrogance, ego.
Yeah. This pride manifests outwardly as intemperance, arrogance, and severe addiction. Nobody can tell them what to do. But because the root was pride, the diabolic inversion means that this specific family line was actually designed and called by God to exhibit profound, world-changing humility.
Wow.
The demon didn't pick pride randomly. It was aggressively attacking the exact virtue they were destined to master, trying to neutralize their spiritual potential before it could bloom.
It completely flips the narrative of generational trauma.
Yeah.
You aren't just broken. You're being targeted because of how powerful you were supposed to be.
It's a very empowering thought.
It really is. But to find that hidden root, to see past the smokescreen, the natural patterns aren't enough. You need spiritual diagnosis. And the framework offers incredibly specific tools for this. First, it recommends daily Christian meditation. And this isn't just mindfulness or emptying the mind. It is actively, silently contemplating God.
And the mechanism behind this meditation goes right back to our Osh hardware analogy from earlier. By sitting in silent contemplation of God, you're intentionally quieting the lower faculties.
Turning down the volume.
Yes, you're turning down the volume on the imagination and the emotions. By cooling the processor, you become sensitive to the very subtle, quiet movements of grace and intellect, rather than being dragged around by the loud, flashing demands of your feelings.
The text also advises asking your guardian angel. It literally says you should directly ask the guardian angel assigned to your family to reveal the hidden root.
Because the angel sees it all.
Exactly. Because the angel has been standing there the whole time watching the demon operate, seeing right through the obfuscation. But the absolute primary diagnostic tool recommended in the lectures is a highly specific devotion to Mary, specifically under the title of Our Lady of Sorrows.
Yes, and there is a deep scriptural logic to this specific devotion. It is based on the biblical prophecy of St. Simeon in the Gospel of Luke. When Mary brings the infant Jesus to the temple, Simeon prophesies that a sword will pierce her own heart.
But there's a reason given.
Right. He gives a specific reason for this suffering, so that the hidden thoughts of many would be revealed.
Exactly. The theology links that exact scripture directly to diagnosis. The source claims that because her heart was pierced to reveal hidden things, if you pray specifically to Our Lady of Sorrows, asking for the revelation of your family's generational root, the results are shockingly fast.
How fast are we talking?
The lecturer claims that usually within a week or two of starting this specific prayer, a person will experience a sudden, crystal-clear aha moment. A memory will surface, or a pattern will suddenly snap into focus, and the true root vice of the family will become undeniably, painfully obvious.
It's a fascinating mechanism for spiritual clarity. But as we discuss diagnosis, I feel the need to push back heavily on this entire mindset.
Please do.
Yeah.
Because as I was reading this, I kept thinking, this is fascinating. It's intricate. But how do we stop ourselves from descending into total paranoia?
That's the danger.
Right. How do we not start seeing demons under every single rock? If I have a terrible day, get stuck in traffic, snap at my spouse, and ruin dinner, is that a demon of anger manifesting? Or did I just skip my afternoon coffee? I'm stressed about a deadline at work, and I behave badly.
That is the vital distinction. And to be fair to the source material, Father Ripperger is acutely aware of the danger of over-spiritualizing. He explicitly warns against this exact paranoia. He has a phrase he repeats. The demon is not under every rock, he's under every other rock.
Ah, okay. That's a good distinction.
Meaning, yes, spiritual warfare is real, but ordinary human failure is also very real. If the demon isn't under the rock you just turned over, you need to put the rock down, look in the mirror, and address your own psychology.
And that is the crux of it, isn't it? The danger of this worldview is that it can become an escape hatch for accountability. The text strongly underscores the danger of blaming demons as a convenient way to avoid taking personal moral responsibility.
You can't just be the victim all the time.
No. If you blame a generational demon of anger for snapping at your spouse, you are making yourself a victim. And if you are a victim of a spiritual attack, you don't have to apologize for simply lacking basic self-control. You can just outsource your bad behavior to the unseen world.
Precisely. You cannot use theology to bypass maturity. But let's say you've done the work. You haven't outsourced your responsibility. You've looked at the natural patterns. You've engaged in meditation. You've looked past the daughter vices. And you have clearly, undeniably diagnosed the root vice.
You found the roommate.
You know exactly what the unwanted generational roommate is. Now what? How does this immense theological framework say you actually evict them? This takes us to our final, highly practical section, the arsenal of spiritual warfare.
And spoiler alert, the foundational weapon in this arsenal is not a magical incantation. It's not a cool Latin chant. It is the incredibly slow, boring, grueling daily development of virtue. Developing virtue is the ultimate defense because virtue naturally detaches you from created things.
We need to use the central analogy from the text here because it perfectly illustrates the mechanics of eviction. The towel and the dog analogy.
Yes. Imagine your attachments to the world, your need for physical comfort, your profound pride, your unhealthy coping mechanisms, your addiction to your phone. Imagine all of those attachments are a towel that you're gripping tightly in your fist.
All right, you're holding the towel.
And the demon is a wildly aggressive dog that has bitten the other end of the towel. As long as you hold on to that towel, the dog has leverage. He can violently drag you all over the room.
Because you're holding on.
Right. Now, you can yell at the dog, you can pray against the dog, you can throw holy water at the dog, but if you don't let go of the towel, you are getting dragged. Perfect detachment, which is achieved through the slow building of virtue, means simply dropping the towel.
It is brilliant in its simplicity. If you drop the towel, the demon has absolutely nothing left to pull. The leverage is gone. And a primary, incredibly physical way to force yourself to drop the towel is through fasting and mortification.
The text insists on this. Fasting cannot just be a sporadic diet you do when you feel guilty after the holidays. It must be treated as a habitual structural virtue, subjecting the physical body, denying it legitimate pleasures like food or comfort, in a controlled, intentional way, literally deprives the demon of access to the lower faculties we talked about in Section 1.
Remember the computer hardware.
Yes, the processor.
If your body is highly disciplined through fasting, you are essentially shutting down the unused ports on the server. You are cooling the processor manually. The demon is frantically trying to overheat your emotions to induce panic or lust, but because you have trained your physical body to endure discomfort through fasting, the physiological levers they usually pull simply do not work anymore.
Okay, so virtue and fasting shut down the hardware. But there are also highly specific active countermeasures in this arsenal. The framework leans heavily into binding prayers and spiritual contracts.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
It is. Binding prayers are exactly what they sound like, but they rely entirely on that divine economy of authority we discussed earlier. You cannot bind a demon you have no authority over. But a parent has legal authority over a child. Spouses have mutual authority over each other. You use that specific legal authority to bind a specific spirit.
The wording is very precise,
Yeah,
right?
it's creamly. The phrasing in the lectures is incredibly literal and legalistic. You say, spirit of backtalking, I bind you. Or spirit of despair in my husband, I bind you. You name the specific behavior and use your jurisdiction to issue a spiritual cease and desist.
The spiritual contracts take that legalism and make it brilliantly efficient. You can create a spiritual trigger with God. You formally pray, Lord, every single time I make the sign of the cross today, let it execute this specific, massive, binding prayer for the protection of my spouse.
I love that.
It turns a simple, repetitive physical action into a continuous, automated spiritual counterattack. You are writing a macro for your spiritual software.
Writing a macro for your soul. Which brings us to perhaps the most visibly Catholic aspect of this entire framework. Sacramentals. These are physical objects. Salt, water, oil, metals imbued with spiritual power through the formal blessing of the Church. This framework relies on them heavily as tactical weapons.
Very tactile.
Right. St. Benedict medals, for instance, are treated almost like physical firewalls. The text claims that demons, curiously, must respect physical boundaries and physical laws if the Church has claimed them. These metals are routinely buried at the four corners of a property to create a secure perimeter or taped over specific doors and windows.
And electronics, too.
Yes. The lectures even note they can be attached to misbehaving electronics, like that car transmission we mentioned earlier, if an infestation is suspected.
And we see blessed oil used similarly. The text describes parents utilizing their specific headship authority to trace the sign of the cross on their children's foreheads with blessed oil before bed. Or, on a more covert, practical level, mothers slipping the blessed oil into the family's cooking, like mixing it into a salad dressing, so that a resistant or unaware family is physically, biologically ingesting the blessing.
It sounds almost like spiritual medicine. And lectures mention votive candles and blessed incense as well. These aren't just for creating a spooky or holy ambiance. They are specifically burned to physically drive out what the text calls demons of the air.
Demons of the air.
Yeah. The theory is that when profound sins, like blasphemy or intense rage, are spoken aloud in a room, they empower entities in that physical space. The smoke of the blessed incense physically displaces the contaminated air, cleansing the environment.
If we pause and connect the use of all these physical objects, the salt, the ingested oil, the smoke of the candles, the buried metals, right back to the metaphysics we discussed at the very beginning, the entire system completes a perfect circle.
It really does tie it all together.
Why do pure spirits care about salt? Because demons, since the fall, act aggressively on the physical world, specifically the physical imagination and the nervous system. Therefore, the Church uses blessed physical matter to counteract them. It is a deeply, unapologetically incarnational view of the universe. In this worldview, matter matters profoundly. The spiritual battle is not just fought with thoughts, it is fought with tangible physical tools.
We also have to touch on a very specific and undoubtedly controversial aspect of the text's view on authority as a weapon of warfare. The lectures emphasize strict, unwavering adherence to traditional patriarchal authority structures as the ultimate mechanism for spiritual protection in the home.
This is a core pillar for him.
It is. The text explicitly states that a wife's submission to her husband is not just a cultural relic or a social dynamic. It provides her with a literal, metaphysical, spiritual shield.
We must report this impartially as the text's exact theological explanation because it is central to their warfare strategy. The argument presented is that stepping outside that specific God-ordained hierarchy of authority, if a wife usurps the headship or a husband abdicates it, it tears a massive hole in the protective umbrella.
It breaks the shield.
Right. It leaves the wife, and consequently all the children beneath her, directly and legally vulnerable to demonic influence. In this legalistic framework, submission equals protection.
It is entirely rooted in their concept of the divine economy of authority. You stay in your legal lane and you are protected. Finally, the arsenal includes the strict, uncompromising policing of media consumption.
Oh, this part is intense.
Very. There's an explicit, dire warning throughout the lectures against curiosity and engaging with the occult, even in the realm of pure fiction. And the prime recurring example used is the Harry Potter series.
Yes, the condemnation of Harry Potter in these lectures is absolute.
The speaker claims that the books do not just contain fantasy words, but actually utilize the literal names of real demons. He argues that millions of people reading these names aloud actually empowers those specific entities in the real world.
He even mentions spells causing physical harm.
Yes. He claims that the spells written in the books can cause actual physical harm when recited, citing an anecdotal story of a house fire in Spain, supposedly spontaneously combusting right after someone recited a fire spell from the book. The mandate from The Exorcist is crystal clear: absolute zero tolerance avoidance of anything that flirts with occult concepts, regardless of whether it is packaged as children's entertainment.
It all comes back to jurisdiction. If you willingly read the spell, you are willingly opening the monitor to the hacker.
Okay. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have mapped the architecture of a hidden world. So what does this all mean for us? We've explored a universe that is incredibly relentlessly structured.
It's a vast system.
In this worldview, spiritual warfare isn't random chaos. It's not a horror movie where the monster just attacks whoever wanders into the woods. It is a highly intelligent, legalistic battle. It involves strict lines of authority, physical entry points, generational baggage passed down like bad debts, and tactical, physical countermeasures.
It is ultimately a profound attempt to map the unseen. It provides concrete, actionable rules and a sense of order for what so often feels like the chaotic, meaningless suffering of human existence. It says your pain isn't random, it has a source, and it has a solution.
And let's bring that right back to you, the listener. Because at the end of the day, regardless of your theology, we all have family baggage. Every single one of us has that dark thread woven into our family tapestry.
We all have the bad roommate.
We do. Whether you view everything we talked about today strictly through the literal theological lens of Father Ripperger,
Right.
believing in literal entities exploiting your timeline, or whether you view this entire framework as an incredibly profound, complex metaphor for generational trauma and the psychology of inherited toxic human behavior, the mandate for your life is exactly the same.
The patterns do not have to be permanent. You cannot afford to just accept the dysfunction as just the way our family is. Awareness is the first step toward eviction, whether that eviction is spiritual or psychological.
Exactly. You have to do the hard work to identify the root cause. You have to stop fighting the daughter vices and find the hidden fear. You have to take strict, uncompromising authority over your own life, drop the towel of your attachments, and break the cycle for the generations that will follow you. I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought today, building on that incredible concept of the diabolic inversion.
The best part of the whole theory.
I really want you to think about the deepest, most stubborn flaw or vice in your family line. The thing that has plagued your parents, the thing that destroyed your grandparents, and the exact thing that you secretly struggle with in your quietest, darkest moments. What if that exact flaw is not a sign of your family's inherent brokenness?
What if it's not a permanent stain?
Right. What if it is not a permanent stain on your lineage? What if it is actually a precise, inverted map of your family's greatest potential? What if the very thing you are fighting so desperately is the exact virtue you were put on this earth to master?
It changes absolutely everything about how you view your own struggles. You aren't cursed, you're just being opposed because of your potential.
It really does. It turns the battlefield into a training ground. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.